Hi, I'm Brendan Dye. Welcome to my channel, a place where you can improve your skills in photography and image editing. I will post tutorials weekly, so make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons to stay abreast with the latest tutorials. Also, make sure that you make your needs known in the comments so that I can create new tutorials for you accordingly. Aperture in photography. Aperture is a crucial element in photography that determines how much light enters your camera through the lens. It directly affects both the exposure and the depth of field of an image, making it one of the three pillars of the exposure triangle, the other two being shutter speed and ISO. You may want to also watch the tutorials on this channel on shutter speed and ISO. Aperture refers to the size of the opening in the camera lens that allows light to pass through the camera sensor or the film, as in the case of the older cameras. It is measured in f-stops, namely f1, f1.4, 2, 2.8, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, and 22. The f-stop number determines the ratio of the lens's focal length to the diameter of the aperture opening. A wide aperture, represented by a small f number, that is f1, f1, f2, f2.8, allows more light to enter, making the image brighter. This is ideal for low light situations where you want to emphasize the subject by blurring the background. A narrow aperture has a larger f number like 11, 16, or 22. It lets in less light, resulting in a darker image. It is useful in bright conditions when you want everything in the frame to be in sharp focus. Aperture also controls depth of field, which is the range of the image that appears sharp. Wide aperture or shallow depth of field, using a large aperture, that is the small f-stop number, creates a shallow depth of field, meaning the subject is in focus while the background is blurred. This is great for portraits as it helps isolate the subject from the background. Narrow depth of field or deep depth of field is a small aperture, that is a large aperture number like f16 or f11 or 22, and produces a deep depth of field where both the foreground and the background are in focus. This is ideal for landscapes or architectural type of photography where you want more of the scene to appear sharp. Bokeh, that is Bokeh, is a term that is used to refer to the out of focus quality of areas in the image. A wide aperture like 1.4, 1.8 produces smoother, more aesthetically pleasing bokeh. It's particularly sought after in portrait photography for creating a beautiful background blur. Aperture and lens speed. A lens with a large maximum aperture like 1.4 or 2.8 is considered to be a fast lens because it can achieve proper exposure with a faster shutter speed. This makes such lenses ideal for low light situations and situations where you want to freeze motion, like in the case of wildlife photography. Aperture priority mode. This mode is available in most cameras with the letter A or AV on the dial, where you set the desired aperture and the camera adjusts the shutter speed or the ISO to get your correct exposure. This mode is particularly useful when you want to control the depth of field, like when shooting portraits or landscapes. F-stop scale. The f-stop scale typically moves in increments such as 1.42, 2.84, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, and 22. Each step between these numbers either halves or doubles the amount of light entering the camera. Moving from f2.8 to 4 cuts the amount of light in half. Moving from 4 to 2.8 doubles the amount of light entering the lens. When adjusting the aperture, you may want to compensate by adjusting the shutter speed or ISO to maintain a correct exposure. Widening the aperture requires a faster shutter speed to avoid exposure. Narrowing the aperture may require to slow the shutter speed or increase the ISO to maintain brightness. Creative uses of aperture. Aperture can be used in portrait photography, so using a wide aperture like 1.4 can isolate the subject by blurring the background and making them stand out. In landscape photography, a narrow aperture ensures that both the foreground and the background remain in sharp focus. In low light photography, in dim environments, a wide aperture can help you capture more light without having to raise the ISO, thus reducing noise. Aperture is an essential tool for controlling both brightness of an image and its creative aspects like depth of field and background blur. Mastering aperture settings allows photographers to capture images with the desired exposure and artistic effect, whether it's sharp landscapes or a beautifully blurred portrait. Understanding how aperture works and how it interacts with other elements of the exposure triangle will significantly improve your ability to take well composed and correctly exposed photographs.